Welcome to Season 2 of WitchLit, a space to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. Christine Grace is a longtime teacher of the craft and a founder of the Forest Edge tradition of witchcraft. She is the co-host of Betwixt Between podcast and author of The Witch at the Forest Edge, 13 Keys to Modern Traditional Witchcraft. She has graduate degrees in theology and mental health counseling from Vanderbilt University. And Christine currently lives, homesteads, and homeschools in the woods with her partner in WitchLits. Christine Grace, welcome to WitchLit.
Thank you for having me. I am so charmed to be here.
I am excited to have you on the show. We were chatting a little bit before, and I already told you that this feels like a special treat to have you on. And I always do a disclaimer if I know the person I'm interviewing. So Christine and I do know each other. She has been a personal teacher for me, and I am a dedicant in the tradition that she is the founder of. So
yeah, it's really extra fun to talk to you. The way I put it was, I'm happy to talk to you. That's exciting. Also a podcast.
Yes, it just works out all together. Well, cool. So our first question for everybody, I say "our" like I have a mouse in my pocket. My husband does the editing.
Well, I
so
did see a cat walk by.
Yes, I do have a cat, and my husband does the editing. So I think of it as our podcast in a lot of ways. So why write?
Why indeed? Like why write anything, or like why write this book?
Either.
Well, I think why write this book is a much easier question to answer. So I'm going to pretend that's what you meant.
Okay.
Well, because it had to get done, and I was the person who did it. There was a moment there where I thought it might be a more collaborative effort, and I might be kind of the editor of kind of more of an edited compilation of materials with like multiple contributors. But that turned out not to be feasible. So I wrote it because I could, and I have some background in writing, and it needed to be written for my own, our own tradition, and for our apprentices. And yeah.
So, and I know a little bit about that story because we were actually talking much more frequently before the COVID times and all those things when you started writing. So what was the actual journey to get it published? How did that look? Because I know you had talked about maybe publishing it yourself, and there had been some conversation around that. So what did getting published actually look like for you?
Yeah, well, that was kind of I know that the most of the time getting published is the goal when you start writing a book. It was not actually the goal for me. I mean, making it in a form that's accessible to people was the goal, but people being a very small number of people who are affiliated with the Forest Edge at the time when I started writing, that was the plan. So, maybe some kind of self-publishing platform, or literally even maybe a PDF, or I don't even know what the end result was going to look like, but having it traditionally published, by one of the kind of pagan publishing companies that we all are familiar with was not the goal. Because I didn't see it as something that had a broad audience. I saw it as a very specific and kind of unusual form of witchcraft, which it's taken so many years to do this, that in the intervening years, that form of witchcraft is no longer bizarre and niche anymore. So eventually I kind of got to the point where I had spent years writing this book, and I was almost done. And I talked to the voices in our tradition, who are kind of the council of elders, I guess you could call it, about kind of the process and where I was with it and how close I was to being done with it, and that I wasn't really sure kind of where to go from there. And the voices were like, well, I think what you do next is you get it published. And I had to kind of sit with that for a minute. And then I decided to at least try. And I figured, well, it's not like it's a problem if it doesn't work out. because I already planned to not. So if I'm just rejected everywhere, and then I go back to my original plan of just having a way to kind of privately give it to people, then that'll be fine. And so fortunately, one of our voices had really just very recently been through kind of the publishing process. And so he was really able to clue me in on how that works in the very specific industry of like pagan-y, witchy publishing, which is kind of different than how it works in, like if you're publishing a novel or something like that. And so I just submitted the proposal to one publishing company, and they wanted some chapters. So I sent some chapters, and then they weren't able to get back to me very quickly because by that point, COVID was happening. And so people's like boards were not meeting that quickly. And it was a strange kind of time to be trying to publish a book. And so I said, hey, so I'm going to send it to the other big pagan publishing company. Also. So I did that. And then almost simultaneously, they both came back with offers. And so I picked one, and there we go. I got to publish a book for real.
It's exciting. And it's a completely, I would imagine it is a completely different path to publishing than most people take to go into writing the book with this idea that it might not even be published publicly, I guess. So. Yeah.
No, I think it's very different in a lot of ways. And one is that I never really anticipated it having a broad appeal because at the time, such like openly animist, very folk, very, very non-Wiccan, witchcraft was just not like a huge thing. And so I couldn't even really conceive of there being a lot of people who would want to read it. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that made it quite different was that it was not exactly that I was starting from zero, because of course our tradition had already existed for many fine years. And so the other teachers and I were already working from materials. So that was kind of a blessing and a curse. The fact that I had some things to be looking at in reference to what I wanted to write fresh. But, I think that could be quite different than if I had just decided, here's a subject I'm interested in and I would like to publish a book on this subject. So now I'm going to sit down and do some research and then start writing.
So once the book got accepted and you chose Wiser to publish with, did they have a lot of input into what you had already done since you had come to it with this, like, this is for our tradition? Did they kind of go, yes, but we need you to do these things?
No. By the time I submitted it to publishing companies, I had taken out anything that I felt was not something I wanted to share with the general public. Obviously, I understood that publishing it meant that it would not just be like for our own tradition members. Mm-hmm. And so I had already done that shift. They did ask for one thing, and it was a really big thing. I had never tried to estimate how many words an incredibly long document like that was going to be. And I estimated wrong. Oh. And so they thought it was going to be a fairly short book, but when it was done, it wasn't. And they were like, well, honestly, we really like the idea of this fairly like short, easy to read book. So I had to cut out 40,000 words.
Wow. That's like a whole book. I mean, that's a whole another book. I mean, a short book, but it's still another book. Wow.
Yeah. So I think some of the things that were lost from the book, I'm bummed about. Some of the things that were lost from the book, honestly, I love the constraints of tight editing. Mm-hmm. When I was an undergrad, I did a lot of work with poetry, and I loved the constraint of like only like the most important words. And I kind of enjoyed putting myself in that position when I was writing a lot for grad school. So in a way, there's some pleasure that I take in being like, how can I convey this idea in the minimum number of words? On the other hand, in order to not like lose essential content for understanding, I had to lose things like spells. Yes, it's a book about witchcraft, no spells in it, because I had to take them out.
I mean, you talk about spellcraft in like a more
absolutely
philosophical
there's a whole
way
chapter about it. Yeah. Which, I hope that it kind of sets up a framework for crafting your own spells and for drawing on your own folkloric influences and your own like life experiences and needs, and creating spell work that is true to like where you are in your specific craft. Nonetheless, people do like to have spells in witchcraft books, and I did not provide in the end.
I mean, there are some like ritual outlines and like frameworks for things that I think can be really helpful. Reading it, I mean, because I had read the training materials that this was based on, like some of it looked very familiar. But the thing that I came away from reading it was that it was kind of like if I had just met you for coffee multiple times and you're like, Victoria, this is how this tradition works. It was like, it was very conversational in that way. And I was like, that's a really interesting approach to it. Cause I do think for like a mass appeal, I mean, as much as mass is in our niche of the world.
I know. So tiny.
Like it still feels very specific to what you wanted to talk about, but it is kind of couched in this like very, I guess, open, like here's my thoughts on these things based on how I practice in this tradition. And you can take what you want from it. Like none of it feels prescriptive, but it does feel descriptive, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that. I'm so glad that comes through. That's absolutely intentional. And, I know you know this, so I'm not really telling this to you, but that's kind of how we tend to roll as a tradition. There's a lot of flexibility, a lot of openness, and a lot of expectation kind of placed on the person to figure out your specifics, your sense of spiritual ancestry, your like local bioregion. And so because this really is kind of coming out of years of teaching, I think it quite reasonably reflects that approach to teaching. And I wanted to find some ways to distill some things that I've learned from teaching, because I've gotten so much out of the experience of teaching and making sure that some of the things I might say to an apprentice, like in person, can come through as much as I can manage in book form, as far as having kind of developed an awareness of ways that different people work and different things that will work for different people, and kind of offering some ideas that I have honestly gotten from experience. So I hope it reflects that.
I think so. I think it does. One of the things, and I think because it's come out of this experience of teaching, like each chapter, for folks who read it, we'll see that each chapter has a set of questions at the end to reflect on, and then some practice suggestions. And I think that it's almost, it's not textbooky though. Like it's kind of an opportunity. It reminded me, like, I almost wanted there to be blank pages in between each chapter.
I thought about
almost
it,
like so like you could use it like a workbook, but I know that increases like print cost and all that good stuff. But I was like, oh, this like a workbook format would almost be really amazing for this kind of book too. So
that was the original plan. Like original, like way before the actual publishing plan. There was a period of time where I was kind of thinking that it would be more of a workbook format, and also like a little bit more textbooky. Like if you remember textbooks as I do, sometimes there are kind of little like side blurbs. So there's like the main text, but then there's kind of these little like pull quotes, almost like little, I don't know, little colored boxes or whatever along the side. And there were originally going to be some of those things, giving like very specific examples of certain things. And originally I'd hoped for those very specific examples to actually come from people who are not me, like mostly not me, in order to get some like other tradition voices into the text and to see kind of a diversity of practice within these kind of overall ideas. But then it became a published book and space became a consideration and, all of that stuff.
Yeah. And contributors are great too, but it's more of a challenge to wrangle all of that too. Mm-hmm. So you have these 40,000 words that you cut from this book. Mm-hmm. And so you have that material separately. So what does writing look like for you now? Like, is writing part of your day to day? I mean, I know you're homeschooling and doing a lot of stuff. So writing is one of those things that takes time away because you can't really do it and like make dinner at the same time kind of thing. So are you currently writing?
Yes, but it has nothing to do with witchcraft. I'm writing a business plan. But there are kind of the nucleus of a couple other books in the works, but it's just not super my focus right now. This particular book needed to happen at this particular time. And so I would often find myself like holding a baby and typing with the other hand. And that was kind of an interesting experience. However, like there are some other aspects of my life that need to be given top priority. And, when I got to the end of this writing process, there were a lot of times where I was shifting a lot to the rest of my family so that I could have time to make deadlines. And I think I'm a few years yet away from a time where I'm super comfortable going back to that level of place because that's just where I'm at right now.
No, I completely understand. I mean, I did poetry in grad school and basically took 20 years off writing or 18 years off writing to raise my kiddo. So yeah, I mean, I kind of feel that. I didn't really get back to it until he graduated. So
yeah.
I don't know. I don't recommend waiting that long. Like he was a little more self-contained in high school. I think it was just a mental thing for me to take that long a break. So I completely understand. So when you do get to write or when you're working on this book, do you have like rituals around your writing? Or did you just
have rituals? Yeah. So do you mean like kind of like the day-to-day rituals? Like I'm going to sit down and write now. And so what do I do?
Yeah.
Okay. So those kind of day-to-day things are usually really simple for me unless I'm having some kind of problem. But normally it's kind of like light a candle, maybe some incense, maybe a little smoke cleansing bundle, and just kind of real quick kind of get into kind of shift gears from mom and teacher and blah, 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 whatever, to now I'm kind of going into this like world of words and expression. But then I see books also as kind of having a spirit of their own. And so like be kind of beyond those kind of day-to-day kind of consciousness changes for me. Sometimes I actually do also work with kind of the developing spirit of the book more directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, as an animist, like that, like almost has to be part of the work of writing this kind of book, I would think.
Yes.
So do you have like a perfect writing day or perfect writing setup for you? Like where things are just easier? Like, I don't know, kind of weather, temperature, like those kind of things.
Oh, well, I think it's better when it's not too nice outside because if it's just a real delight outside, then I would just rather be outside. So if the spring ephemerals are blooming, I don't know that I'm excited about writing. although I do occasionally bring like a tablet into the woods with me. And like, I'll kind of set the kids up where like the one who doesn't love doing things on paper so much is like kind of building like a fort or a bridge over a creek or something. And then the one who does like to write and draw is like doing her own writing and drawing. And then I'm typing on my little foldy tablet-y thingy. Mm-hmm. But that's not a super productive way for me to work. Definitely being like alone in the room where I do writing and where my main altar also is. A rainy day is just a real delight, although not like scary tornado rain, because we get a lot of that here. So if I'm like nervously awaiting the possibility of running down to the basement, not so much fun. But if it's regular rain, I love it. But I love that weather anyway. So
I do feel like rain is like for me too, is very creative weather. And like in California, like I could probably count the number of days it's rained since we've lived here on both ends. So yeah, it's been an adjustment to get used to that. I don't miss the tornado weather. And there's really not such a thing as earthquake weather as far as I know. So really it's just like, I really wish it rained more. I am not alone in that. I'm sure. I think everybody wishes it would rain more right now, but
I bet.
Probably not for the same reasons. I mean, I would like it to end the drought, but I would also like it for creative purposes.
Yeah, I remember feeling that way when I lived in California too.
Yeah. So what do you think, like, because you had the kind of goal you had with this book, what do you think the biggest challenge in writing it was?
I mean, honestly, it was just probably the time and energy to do it. Because now my kids are a little bit older. And so it is possible for me to say, I am busy for the next hour. Like, come get me if there's an actual problem. But like, Mom, I'm bored. Mom, can I have a snack? We're not doing that for the next hour. That's a possibility now. But during the time that I was writing the book, that was not a possibility. Because they were just too young to even, and they're fairly chill now. But anyway, so just literally finding time when I am awake and they are not was very difficult. Or trying to occupy them so I could write a few words. It was bananas. So honestly, that's not like super about writing, I guess, but just literally finding the time to do it was the hardest part.
I think it is about writing. I mean, I think it's one of the things, especially so many of the writers I know personally are women, and either they have grown kids now or they have younger children. And it's the same conversation. It's like, how do you, especially if they have a full-time job on top of raising children, it's like, where in that, 20 minutes in the morning, am I going to get a novel finished or whatever? So I think it's a conversation for a lot of writers.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I think most adults, parents or otherwise, perhaps have a lot going on. And most of us are not writing as our or at least not writing the things we enjoy writing as our full-time profession. So
what was the best thing about writing a book other than getting it finished, I would imagine?
Yeah. Well, I guess I really enjoy writing. Like, I just kind of enjoy the process of having kind of unformed ideas floating around and then putting them on paper and then being like, okay, how can I do that better, and making it better until I finally read it. And I'm like, yep, that conveys both the message and the tone that I wanted. I just find that process pretty satisfying. So I like that. And then I also really enjoyed sending like draft chapters to people and getting their feedback and then integrating that. I found that really interesting. And, one thing that I think was difficult for me when my kids were younger, and it still can be, but especially when they were younger and just required more like physical care and less kind of like intellectual care. Like now that I'm teaching them, there's more for me to do kind of brain wise. But when I was writing, they were so little that a lot of my care for them was very kind of practical and hands-on, and just kind of exercising my brain in that particular way was just sort of a delight, like stretching a muscle that's been like a little cramped from not moving much for a while or something.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. Just especially like, when you're home all the time with littles too, it's like you just talking to a grown-up. The writing is kind of like, that kind of same outlet, like your brain is like making full sentences and not single words. Whatever your communication is with, tiny people. But no, that also makes sense. So in working on the book, did you find that kind of like, I guess, describing your practice and the traditions practice, did you find that it changed anything or deepened anything in your practice while you were writing?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to say because I wrote over such a long period of time that I'm not sure I can say my practice deepened and changed because I was writing or just because like years pass. And I think, if you're having like an active practice of witchcraft, it is going to deepen and change over the course of years. Mm-hmm. So yes, but I'm not sure to what degree the writing itself is what created that.
Mm-hmm. So it just kind of happened because how long actually did it take you to write the book?
Like most of my daughter's life, and she just turned 6.
Wow.
So, yep.
Yeah, that's a pretty good run for a book. And to have, an extra 40,000 words that didn't make it in there either. Right.
Yeah. And I'm definitely counting the time that I spent, editing out those 40,000 words as writing time, because at least for me, the editing is such an important part of the writing. It never comes out the first time exactly the way I want it to be in the end.
If someone does that, I really want to talk to them and meet them. Like I have yet to meet a writer who's like, no, I just do it and don't ever look at it again. Like how?
Well, I have met writers like that.
You say that with your eyebrows raised, which no one can see but me. I think I know what that means.
Yeah, I think you do.
Yeah. So I guess kind of in that realm, like what do you think is the best advice you've gotten about writing? I mean, because you've written academically in grad school and you've written this book, which isn't academic per se, but it's definitely, I guess, didactic in that way. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the best writing advice you've gotten about that kind of writing?
Advice. Well, I'm not sure this is exactly advice, but I think I mentioned this before. Writing poetry, I think, is great training for writing other things, because if you can convey something complicated in a short amount of words, obviously the style of writing a paper for whatever or for a book is a different style, but still to be able to take something very complicated and perhaps kind of profound and figure out how to say that in a small number of words, that kind of like whittling down skill, I think takes time, but is like the core skill. Like when I read writing that spends too many words saying something that could have been said in a shorter amount of words, I understand why, because it's so difficult, but I also wish they had whittled it down a little. So I think like, don't be afraid of the whittling process. Like the fact that you wrote a word doesn't mean it's now sacred and cannot be changed. The idea might be sacred, but the words can be cut and modified. And for some reason, like the actual writing advice that jumps out is a teacher in undergrad who said to me, it doesn't matter that you're good at it. It matters if you do it every day. And I totally did not write this book by doing it every day because I couldn't, which is kind of funny advice that I'm like, that's pretty good advice. Didn't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there are those kind of truisms like, oh, writer is a person who writes. And if you want to be a writer, you need to write every day. And I'm like, those are great ideas. I mean, I do think a writer is a person who writes. You don't have to be published. You don't have to do any of that to be a writer. But I think the writing every day did not involve 21st century life in the middle of, climate crisis, political upheaval, wars, and pandemics. I just don't think that's a realistic thing for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do know that, a lot of people set quite stringent goals for themselves in terms of writing. So I really can appreciate that, although I do not.
And I always try. And when people ask me writing advice, like I'm not a writing sage, and B, write when you can write. If you can't, if something's going to burn down because you need to go be alone for an hour and write, then maybe don't let it burn down. Write it later, So I think a lot of people do get stuck in this idea that if I'm not doing it every day, then I'm not really a writer. And I'm like, no, that's not true.
I don't think that's how a lot of books get written. There's not many people who really can write every day.
No. And I mean, I've read a lot about writers and read a lot of writing advice over the years. And, like there are people who write 500 words a day and they're done. It doesn't matter if it takes them all day or it takes them an hour and a half or 15 minutes or whatever, and their goal is 500 words a day and they're done and they can produce 30 books over their lifetime. That's great. And then there are people who are like, no, I write 8 hours a day and however many words are on the page, that's when I'm done. And I'm like, so for me, there would be days when there'd be like 10 words after 8 hours. It's like, I got my 10 words in today. It just took me 8 hours to do it. So, but it's an interesting, I just like, I guess in many ways, like witchcraft, I feel the same way about witchcraft that I feel about writing. It's like, no one has all the answers.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true about witchcraft writing, probably like everything.
Yeah. Like no one has all the answers and there's not one way to do it. So you said there might be a couple other ideas floating around up there. Can you talk about those at all? Or do you want to talk about those at all?
Sure. One is kind of a pagan parenting book. And the other one that I think will come later is about trauma and ritual.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Both of those sound like in-depth projects, I think, that probably both have a lot of research behind them. A very different kind of book than this one. But both sound much more research heavy.
Yeah, the second one is very research heavy. The first one, probably less so, because I'm not necessarily like trying to trace the history of pagan parenting or anything. Yeah. But yeah, we'll see when I get around to it. The kids have to be a little bit older, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think the pagan parenting book, I mean, there are a few of those floating around, but I do think because so many people approach it differently, I think that would be an added bonus for people looking for that kind of work. And I love
the surge. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I love the surge of interest in pagan parenting lately. I am so excited to see more books being published, and they're mostly like aimed at children, like pagan children's books. But I just love it. I'm pumped about it. And I feel like for so many years, like the only advice I could really give was, well, there's this book called Circle Round. There's Puka Pages, which the founder of that died recently, so there's not Puka Pages anymore. But and then use Waldorf resources because the seasonal approach is still there, so you will be able to kind of pull some ideas from those practices and integrate them into your own whatever. But now there's all these other resources out there. And I'm really excited about the world of children's book publishing right now.
Yeah. I'm hoping to entice a couple children's pagan children's book authors.
Pagan children's.
Yeah. Like the words do not want to come together. Yeah. Pagan children books author to come on the show. Cause I think though it's not something I have read or isn't as much. My son is 20, almost 27. So obviously it's not, not a current need, but for me personally, but it's a current need in the world. And so I really would love to talk to those folks too. So if anybody's listening, who's a children's book author, call me. but I also like the second book, I guess has an immediate interest for me too, because I do think, and I think you bring this up actually in The Witch at the Forced Edge, that, there is an edge of danger sometimes to hedge writing or ritual possession and those things that if you have trauma in your past, those can definitely open those wounds or put you in a place you didn't expect to be because you're in this space. And I think even with just day-to-day ritual, if you have religious trauma, just even something that's ritualized, if you come out of a highly ritualized, birth religion or whatever you want to call it, that you were raised into paganism, that can be triggering to have a hierarchy of things. So I think that's really interesting to talk about.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, we're all coming into our practice of the craft as whole human beings, as people with our traumas, with our diagnoses, with our histories. So of course, I think there's no way to separate our humanness from our witchness. So there's that, but also I think at the same time, ritual can be such a powerful catalyst for working with your own trauma. I absolutely am trained as a therapist, super support the traditional mental health pathways, in no way suggesting that ritual is a substitute for mental health care. But I have certainly found for myself and for others who are close to me that doing the work in ritual alongside therapy and medication and whatever else, is called for in an individual's situation can just bring a piece to our own work that is typically missing in conventional mental health care.
Yeah. I mean, the spiritual aspect is often left out, I do think, in traditional mental health care. So yeah. Well, I'll be excited when this book happens, whenever that is. I'll be looking forward. I'll be looking forward to it. So in the interim, if people want to catch you now, where is the best place for people to connect with you?
Well, I'm taking a little, almost a break from Instagram right now, but you can still find me there at a witch betwixt. But I'm not posting every day religiously anymore. There is a Discord server called Witchcord where I can be found. There's ChristineGraceBetwixt.com, which is my website. Obviously, I'm on the Tradition Discord.
So good places. So this because I sent you a list of questions. That our last question is a bit of a game of chance.
Okay.
To talk about things that, people aren't supposed to talk about. Although I have said this multiple times, the whole podcast is that a tiny bit. So I'm going to roll a die. And for you, because I know from the book and from talking and from knowing you that you work with runes, my son got me a D&D set that has runes on it, a D&D dice that have runes on it. So I picked that one out for you. It's very heavy metal, so it's probably going to clank on the desk. And if I roll a 1, we get to talk about death, 2, sex, 3, religion, 4, politics, 5, money, and 6, you get to pick which one you want.
Wow. Okay.
And I rolled a 6, so you get to choose.
Oh, well, I don't know. That's a lot of responsibility. I don't know. Whatever you want.
Tangential.
That's fine.
It's tangential to your book. Tangential to your book or writing in general is not a totally random question. So
yeah, whatever you want, you pick. I don't care. None of those are like troublesome to me to discuss.
They're not troublesome to me either, obviously. So you don't talk about this directly in the book. I mean, you do talk about ancestors and working with ancestors in the book of the spiritual and our like lineage, bloodline ancestors. But you don't really talk about like because the tradition is not dogmatic in any way, like what happens in your belief system when we die? What happens to us?
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. I don't really know. And I am okay with kind of living in that state of uncertainty. I know most people are really uncomfortable with that, but I am kind of okay with being like, I'm not exactly sure how the system works. All I know is that from my own experience and from folks who I know, we are able to work with our ancestors. So whatever that means about the afterlife is what it is. I like to think about kind of the literal physical kind of recycling process of a body decomposing into soil. And I like to kind of envision at least an aspect of what happens after we die being kind of integrated in that way. So spirit wise and body wise, there's like kind of a recycling process going on. The idea of kind of like one-to-one reincarnation, like a whole like spirit is one person, and then in the next life they're like a new person, and like that like soul, that spirit stays like entire throughout that process. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I'm not saying it's not true. I don't know, but that's not my favorite theory. So I like the recycling piece, but then if we are recycled in some sense, then how is it that we're interacting with our ancestors? Is there a piece of us that doesn't recycle? Is it like, this is my favorite, that the kind of like molecules of us remember where they come from. So even if my grandfather is now like part daffodil and like part fish and whatever, that when I'm working with my grandfather as an ancestor, that process doesn't make it impossible to connect with his spirit, that all those pieces can kind of resonate together, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I don't know what happens when we die.
Yeah. I mean, I did not ask you because I wanted you to pronounce for everyone, but I was curious about your actually. Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I don't really know. I'm okay with it. I didn't know where I was before I got here. And that's never bothered me really. But yeah, I have the same recycling thought too. Like, if I can have this relationship with ancestors, they can't be 100% reincarnated. So I'm kind of come away with the same, like, how does this work? Questions. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's something I do think about it a lot. And it's partly because of the theme in my writing is, kind of this interaction with the afterlife and ancestors and things like that. It's a big part of my fiction writing. So it's something I think about a lot. And I'm always curious as to where they are in that realm of what they think happens.
It's something I love as a teacher. And I think because I have sort of an open-ended, like I'm kind of comfortable with having a kind of open-ended perspective. It's not like threatening or upsetting to me to hear like a very different perspective, but everybody wants to talk about it. And it always comes up because we're talking about ancestors. We're talking about being able to have relationships with ancestors. So what does that mean? And it always comes up and everybody has like a slightly different perspective. And it's something I really like discussing.
Oh, same. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we got to talk about that. And I'm glad we got to talk about lots of other things. And so hopefully the podcast lasts long enough that when you write your pagan parenting book and your trauma book, you can come back on the show and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, that'll be a good long run.
That would be great. So, but Christine, thank you so much. I wish
that for you.
Oh,
yes, well, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Bolt Press and is edited by Keifel Agostini, who also designed our logo. Our music is Voices, composed for us by Alexander Shanekar. You can support our work, get early access to episodes, ask your own death, sex, religion, politics, money question, and get some free stuff by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/WitchLitPod. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at WitchLitPod. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and give us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps other witches find the show. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.